Well, we want to talk for a little bit about attitudes on the spiritual path and how they help us. And then we'll later do some questions and answers. So when I was first with Swamiji, first few years, he often, in fact, regularly talked about attitude, and that attitude was the most important thing of all. And I think being kind of young and more into wanting to learn techniques and so on, I didn't pay so much attention to that. I wanted to learn properly the Kriya and do these things the right way and all of those kinds of things. But gradually, as I've been on the path longer and longer, I have been able to come around to completely agree with him that really the most important thing on the spiritual path is the attitudes that we have, the consciousness, the mindset, the direction of our energy. In our practice of Kriya, for instance, and especially in the higher Kriyas, the purpose of those techniques are to bring the energy into the upper chakras. And so here I'm going to start talking about technique, which was what was interesting to me. So that technique is to help bring and keep the energy in the upper chakras. But what that does is, because where our energy is, that's the way our mind functions. And when our energy is in the upper chakras, and especially not only the energy isn't just stable, it isn't just like you move a big boulder and you put it in your heart and then it stays there. Energy is fluid, it's always constantly changing. But when the energy is in the upper chakras and when it's moving in an upward direction, then our attitudes begin to come in line, and our attitudes are in attunement with our spiritual desires. Remember, Master in the autobiography said that thoughts are universally, not individually, manifested or rooted. So, and then he went on to explain that we pick up thoughts that are universally present in God's consciousness, and that our mind is less like a creative force than it is something that is like a radio dial, and that our mind picks up, like a radio picks up the signal of the station, and then the radio plays that. So our mind picks up according, and when you tune a radio dial, what you're doing is you're working at different frequencies. So you change the dial and it changes the frequency and it picks up a different station. In our consciousness, as we change the frequency of our consciousness, it picks up different thought forms and different consciousness and different attitudes. And so as we bring the energy more and more into our upper chakras, it picks up, one might say, more refined radio stations, more refined attitudes. And those attitudes, then it kind of forms a feedback loop. So the upper chakras are the heart center, the throat center, and of course the medulla and the spiritual eye. And that represents the heart. Anahat chakra represents the feeling aspects. And this especially is where the attitudes that we have are rooted. And so if the energy is moving in an upward direction from the heart center, the station that we'll be picking up, since earlier today we were talking about kindness and did that affirmation, so the heart, when the energy is moving in an upward direction, it always expands. As the energy comes up, it expands, and as it comes down, it contracts. So as that energy comes up and through the heart and begins to expand, then we begin automatically to pick up the radio station, the attitude of kindness. And so as we begin to expand, we see other people truly as friends, as family members. We see the whole world as our family. It's sometimes difficult to think in terms of too big of a number, you know. How do you know that somebody in Africa that you've never known existed is a brother or sister? Well, you get the sense that everyone is. But then you can be friends on a theoretical level with someone in Africa and be quite upset with somebody sitting next to you at the office. And so we have to work both on these large scales and on the more intimate scales. But as the energy flows upward from the heart expands and begins to accept everyone and to love everyone and to want to work with kindness for everyone. And so if we can't always have, yes, we can. I'm going to roll that tape back and edit it a little bit. We can always have the right attitude. We don't always have the right attitude, but it's possible to. So if we have the attitude that we should be kind to everyone, then we're much more likely to put that into practice. So if the person at the desk next to us shouts at us or is brusque, we're more likely to respond in kindness. If we see something in the newspaper that would be upsetting to us, we're more likely to respond to it either with equanimity instead of getting all upset, or at the very least, we expand, because the energy is expansive, we say, well, that person is in delusion. It's too bad, but I don't have to let it upset me. And so as these energy expands and our attitudes change, our viewpoint of what is happening around us in the world begins to shift. So there was a story, I may have shared it with you before, but it's such a clear example. So imagine that you're riding on the bus and you have it's the end of the day, or since the metro is very crowded, it's the end of the day, you've gotten on the metro and you're going to head home. It's very crowded, but you've just gotten some chai and you're going to drink it, and you're just about to drink it, and somebody bumps your elbow and it spills all over. And you're just about to turn around and really chew this person out, tell them what a fool they are, why they should behave themselves, why they should be careful, all of these things. Your mind is, just getting all riled up, and you turn around and you see that the person is blind. And all of a sudden, seeing that, your attitude changes, and you know that they can't help themselves. And so our expectations of the behaviors of others are built around our attitudes. And so if we can generally tune the radio dial of our consciousness in terms of, because every attitude has upward and downward movement to it, but tune in terms of how we relate to others in terms of kindness or judgment. Let's call those the duality here. So if we tune it more to kindness, then not only do we perceive people's actions in a much more forgiving, much more accepting way, but because we emanate that quality, people begin to respond to it, and their behavior around us tends to be kind. And so our kindness to them helps them, and they respond and they become kind to us. Swami was always, always kind, and when he would um, go into a store, he would treat that person, the owner or the salesperson in the store, he would treat them like they were his friend and begin a little conversation with them, you chat, just not artificially, but just in a very friendly way. And very soon they would feel the same thing, and they would begin to want to help him to look at things, to find what he was trying to find, but not from a merchant standpoint, from a friendship standpoint. And it was interesting that in the last week of his life, one would think that he would attend to things if because he knew that it was a very short period of time. One would think if you had a week left in your life, you would attend to those things that are really important. Isn't that right? You know what he did? He had a little tea where he called some friends over, and it just shared with them a little bit. But that would be expected. You know, if you would want to share with your family, share with your friends, if you knew you had only a week left. But you know what else he did? Even though he was very, very weak at this point, and actually quite withdrawn, he asked Anand, who always drove him, Anand and Kirtani, he said, let's go into town. I want to visit the shops. Because over the years he would go back to these shops, and the shopkeeper, the little deli where he bought some cheese or some spread to put on a sandwich, that man had become his friend. And the vegetable seller, and the place where he bought beautiful little gift items. Anyway, he had Anand drive him into town, and even though he was barely able to walk, he would get out of the car, go in, and chat a little bit, and perhaps buy something. But without saying goodbye, I'm going to die in 5 days. It was just that last final exchange, because he saw his interactions with other people as a way of blessing them. And friendship is a way of blessing other people. And so that attitude of friendship permeated his behavior. And because it permeated the way that he behaved to people, people behaved back in that same way. There was a man who used to do his gardening. He would come only very occasionally. He would come maybe every month or two, and he would take care of some trees and some things. The morning of Swami's passing, he woke up at 4 or 5 in the morning, and with a compulsion to go out and to Swami's house. He lived at some distance. He drove to Swami's house, and he was trimming some trees outside at the time of Swami's passing. He wanted to be in that vibration and be in that presence. He didn't know consciously, because these things, the attitudes, are often not conscious. The things of the heart are often not conscious. They're just a feeling. And in fact, what very often happens is we will have a feeling, and we will begin to do something or behave in a certain way, and then the mind comes in and kind of creates a story that makes rational sense out of what we're doing. And we think it's the other way around, that we have this clear program in our mind, and that the mind is in charge of our behavior, and therefore we're doing what the mind tells us we're supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be kind, and it's really the other way around. The attitude, the vibration, the station that we're tuned into, that underlies our conscious thoughts about things. And then, as I say, we make up a story that makes it seem like the ego understands what's going on and is in charge. when it really isn't. The soul is in charge. Our intuition is in charge. And so these proper attitudes, or getting the dial set properly, is fundamental to the spiritual path. Now, as I said, we can always keep our dial set, but realistically we don't. We have too many, Master called them the thwarting crossed currents of ego. And so all of those past ways of thinking, past behaviors, past ways that we've had the radio dial set. I must say, one time, I'll just break off, one time Diana, who you all know and is one of strong will and very positive energy, she was walking with someone, and this person was complaining about this and complaining about that and complaining about that other thing. And Diana finally got fed up and turned to her and says, "Listen, girl, what station are you tuned into?" And so, as we attune to the right station, then the attitudes that we need begin to come there. So as I was saying, theoretically, we could always have all right attitudes, and we need to work on that. How do you have right attitudes? Well, for one thing, you tune into Master, because Masters, their attitudes are always exactly right. And, it isn't that they're always, since we're talking about kindness, it's not that they always demonstrate outwardly kindness, because true kindness might be that they have to demonstrate in a particular instance sternness. So there's a story, maybe you've heard it, that there was a disciple, and Master was correcting one of the other disciples, this nun that was there. And he was shouting at her, and he was walking up and down the room, and he was really giving her a chewing out. And this disciple thought, "Oh, I've never seen Master so upset." And Master obviously picked up his thought. Master wasn't upset. It was just at that time, this woman, out of kindness for her, this woman needed strength, because she wasn't listening to when he said, "Oh, you should do this," that. So he had to shout at her. But he would stride up the room, and when he was facing her, he would be shouting, and then he'd turn around, he'd still be shouting, but then he'd wink at the fellow who was watching this drama. So his own attitude was always one of kindness, always one of love, but love, in this case, directed in a way that was helpful to this person. So the outer expression of these attitudes may vary somewhat, but the inner attitude is something that we should always strive to have under our control. And so there are a couple of things, and then I'll end, and Devi will also speak, and then we'll answer some questions. A couple of things that help. One is, get the habit of constantly offering your thoughts and your attitudes to Master. So if you're about to do something, ask Master, "Is this right? Should I do this?" If you have a problem you don't know how to solve, "Master, help me solve this." But if your mind keeps turning back to Master, the spotlight of my mind will ever keep turning toward Thee. And in the constant din of activity, my silent war cry will be, "God, God, God." So let the spotlight of your mind constantly keep turning back to Master or to God as much as you can. And these habits are trainable. So that's one thing that helps produce the right attitude. The other is that, just as we did this morning, affirmation. If you don't have the right attitude, then affirm the right attitude. And the more you drive that into your mind and accept it on the conscious subconscious and superconscious levels, if you accept the right attitude or the right affirmation, then it changes where your dial is tuned in. And when your dial is tuned in to the right vibration, you will automatically have the right attitude. So these are just some thoughts to share.
Hello again. So there are different aspects, one might say building blocks of the spiritual life. We can analyze them as right technique, right teaching, right teacher, true Sadguru, and then right attitude. But I think we can, for our discussion today, I think without right attitude, the other three, it's easy to miss the true point of what they have to bring us. So in other words, with right technique, there was a story that Swami told when he was in the presence of the great woman saint Anandamoyi Ma. And there was a man who came who was quite an adept in Hatha Yoga. And he could do the most complex postures and all these things. So Swami happened to be there. And this man was going through this demonstration of his technical skill. And Swami said, Ma, let's say, Sumitra was, I don't want to use you as the man, but let's say the man was sitting right there. Ma was just, she didn't even look at him. She was just gazing off into space. And then finally, when he got kind of upset because she wasn't appreciating his great technical skill, he just stomped off and left. And then she turned and smiled. But technique alone, if we think, oh, I have the higher kriyas, I have this, I have that, it can just lead to pride if it's not balanced with the attitude of, this is a tool with which I have been blessed. Let me use it, but it doesn't make me better because I have this technique. So techniques in and of themselves, without the right attitude, won't bring you to God. So then we come to right teaching. Well, of course we need the right teachings to help us clearly see what the path is and what reality is, what truth is, how we find it. But again, in Autobiography of a Yogi, remember in the wonderful chapter, Years in My Master's Hermitage, where Master tells about Sri Yukteswar's training of the disciples, where some very learned pundit came and he was expounding the scriptures and going on, and Sri Yukteswar was not too impressed. And he was just kind of not responding. And then after some time, Sri Yukteswar turned to him and he said, I have heard many words, but now I would like to hear your own wisdom. And the man was not used to this kind of treatment. He was used to impressing people with his knowledge of the scriptures and the teachings and so forth. And the man just was flabbergasted and he said, I give up. I don't have any realization. It's all memorized. I've just memorized all these things. So we can have the right teachings, but again, if we're just using them to impress people with how much we know, that's not going to help us spiritually. But if we take the teachings and say, okay, these are like reading the Bhagavad Gita, you can read it and say, oh yes, I've read the Bhagavad Gita. Also, remember Sri Yukteswar when was it Babaji that asked him if you've read the Bhagavad Gita? And Sri Yukteswar said, my eyes have passed the words many times, but I can't say I really understand it. And Babaji said, so few have answered in this way. So to take the great teachings and to meditate on them and to understand them from deep within your heart, not just to say, oh yes, I know these things. And so teachings alone won't bring you God if you don't have the right attitude. And then the right teacher. We've been so blessed in our lives to be drawn into the spiritual orbit of a Sadguru, Paramahansa Yogananda, our master. But if we approach him with, my guru is better than your guru, and or I'm very special because I'm a disciple, that won't help you. The right attitude towards your teacher is one of profound humility, profound gratitude, willingness to do whatever he says. And no matter how foolish it may seem, we were speaking at the little break. Many of you were in the room. Some of you hadn't arrived yet or were in the other room. But we got a chance to screen the movie The Answer, which will be released in India in the spring, March of 2018. And the script is written by Swami. It's the story of his life, and it's the story especially of the time he spent with Master. And at a certain point, Master told Swami, this was must have been in the late 1940s, early 1950s, where most men in the West did not have beards. And Master looked at Swami and he said, "You should grow a beard." And Swami he hadn't thought to do such a thing. And he said, Master said, "It will give you character." And Swami said, "It will make me look like a character." But then Master said, "Try it." I love that. And the actor who portrayed him did it so nicely. It wasn't what the Guru, tell you to do it. He just said, "Try it." And Swami was so in tune with his Guru that he understood. If my master asks me to do this, then I'll do it. And he grew a beard. And then in some later scene, it was so beautiful. This is all true stories from Master's life, or Swami's life with Master. And then Swami comes to Master and he said, because his parents were not in favor of him joining the monastery, but he knew it was what he had to do. And so Swami comes to Master and says, "My parents are going to be visiting, and it's not going to be an easy visit." And then he starts to say, "And my father," and Master cut him off and he said, "You have no father." And he said, "I mean my earthly father." And then Master looked at him and he took him by the face and he said, "I can tell you this much, he won't be happy when he sees your beard." And then Master, it was so sweet, just like the Heavenly Father. Master kind of went like this to Swami's face, and he called to someone, "Bring me a comb and scissors." And then the Guru was trimming the beard of the disciple, made it nice and neat and well-defined, and so that the parents wouldn't be so offended. But to have the right attitude towards Guru disciple, that's much more important than even having the right Guru. Because if we don't have the right attitude, then we miss the point of what the Guru has to give us. So in this context, really, right attitude is more important than technique, teachings, even Sadguru. And so what are some attitudes that we can draw from what we're saying here? Humility, willingness, acceptance of the Guru's guidance, knowledge of how to work with, understanding that the gifts and graces we have been given spiritually don't make us important. They're tools any more than when you go to school and your teacher gives you your first book to learn how to read, and you're learning your alphabet and you're learning how to read. You don't think, "Oh, I'm a special person. I have a book that's going to teach me how to read." Well, it's the same with the spiritual teachings. It doesn't make us special. We have to learn how to use them and then use them. And then, if it's God's will, to teach other people how to read as well, how to practice this path. So to see all the things that we're given as opportunities, nothing that we own, nothing that we possess, nothing that we're attached to. There's a beautiful story because we were just in Assisi, we were thinking about the wonderful saint of Christianity, St. Francis. He gave up everything. He was a rich man's son, gave it all away, abject poverty. All he had was a little worn cloth made out of old rags, and then he had a copy of the Bible. And one day he was uh, wandering through the countryside, and a beggar woman came to him, and she said, "Oh," and he had nothing. He just begged for his food. He had no money, no clothes, no house. And she said, "Oh, sir, she was an old beggar woman. Please, is there something you have to give me?" And he looked, he had nothing, but he felt such compassion. All he had was his copy of the Bible. And so he gave that to her, and she could sell it and get food. And then she went away, and he started to cry. And he said, "Oh Lord, I've given away your word." And then Christ appeared to him and said, "My son, don't you understand? You don't need that book. It's in your heart. My words are in your heart." And so it is, the right attitude towards teachings is to make them in a living reality in your own heart that shape and influence all of your actions, all of your thoughts, all of your associations with other people. So whenever you have a choice in life, as Jyotish was saying, hold up that of how to act, how to think, what to do, what road to take. Because, this morning Jyotish quoted that kind of folk philosopher who said, if you don't know where you're going, it doesn't matter what road you take. But we do know where we're going. And so it does matter which road we take. And sometimes that road isn't clear to us. And so that's when we ask the Guru, God and Guru, Lord, give me the right attitude, give me the right direction, give me the right insight, that every step I make brings me closer and closer to you. So these are just some thoughts on how to work with the right attitude in your spiritual life. And now we have a number of questions that people have submitted, so I think we'll start with those. Okay. As we said yesterday in Gogan, I will read the question and Jyotish will answer it. After attaining bliss, calm, joy state in meditation, how can it be sustained?
Well, any uplifted state that we attain in meditation, there are stages, and we would do well to understand that stages in our own development. And when we first attain bliss or calmness or joy or love in an expanded way during meditation, it's because the mind has become calm and the heart has become opened, and as I was saying, the dial of our consciousness has been tuned to the highest dial, and therefore that consciousness automatically appears in our mind. But then as we leave the meditation room, the dial gets changed, and those same attitudes or same qualities don't necessarily stay with us. So how do we prolong them? One, we keep turning our mind back to God as often as we can. Secondly, we try to remember it's very, very valuable to have those experiences, because once you have it, then it's in your memory as opposed to just I read. So it's Master said that you can read about the taste of an orange, you can study, you can even write papers on the taste of an orange, but until you taste an orange, you won't really know what it's like. So having that experience of bliss, or deep love or calmness, whatever that high experience is very valuable because now you've had the taste and you can remember it as opposed to theoretically try to perceive what it might be like. So the memory is a more powerful tool. So remember as often as you can. Another thing, don't talk about those high states very much. Keep them to yourself. One, not because you don't want to share your bliss with people, but what you don't want to share is the remains of the egoic pride of, should have seen me in meditation this morning. Boy, did I ever have bliss. You know, poof, that bliss is gone. And so you keep them for yourself and just between you, are very precious between you and God. And then try to return to them as often as possible. Gradually, as you do that, they will come more and more often and they'll become more and more permanently there until even like joy may not always be present at the top of your consciousness, but it's the sound of Om is always going on in your mind. And if you get calm and listen, then you go right back. You can hear it. Once you begin to hear it, you can always hear it. And you just have to remember to do that. So that joy is an underlying state and it's always there. You just have to remember to return to it. And so try to remember as often as possible during the day to return to these states. And then gradually they become stronger and stronger in the sense that they're more present in your conscious mind.
I'll just add one thing. If you do have an experience of bliss or joy, whatever it may be, of God's presence, it's a good thing at that time not to say, oh, if you try to hold on to it for yourself, you will lose it immediately because it's not attached to the ego. If the ego tries to step in and say, this is mine, you neutralize it. But if you have a state of higher consciousness that comes, immediately try to offer it back to God. Thank you, God. Thank you for this experience. And the more we can do that, the more we create a returning cycle of energy. And so every gift or grace that comes, just don't let it adhere to yourself, to your sense of ego, to your sense of individuality, but just immediately offer it back to God, because those states, bliss, joy, light, they can't exist in the same time-space continuum as the ego exists. They're free of that. And so try to offer them back up to the realm from which they came. Say again. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Did everyone hear? Yeah. Okay. And, even, thank you for saying that, Rachna, but also when, let's say you're meditating and you have a very deep state, and then you think, oh, I have to get up and go to work. That should be your first priority. You say, no, I'm going to stay in this. This doesn't come all the time. I'm going to stay. And if I'm late for work, the God will let my boss look the other way or whatever it is. But, Swami tells the story in the path where he was having a beautiful meditation when he was a young monk. And then he said, oh, it's time to go for lunch. And he said, well, I'll be able to return to this state. He went to lunch. He lost it. And then many months went by before he found it again. In the Christian Bible, there's a part where a story where Mary Magdalene is washing the feet of Christ, her guru, with costly oil. And then the other disciple, Judas, came and said, oh, you shouldn't be wasting this. This oil could be sold to the poor for money, and the poor can be fed. And Christ said, the poor you have always with you, but me you have not always. And Master interprets that, not just talking about Jesus and his disciples, but talking about the Christ consciousness, the divine consciousness. You don't have, when that comes, that's more important than anything else. So give that priority. Okay, you want to read the next one? There.
We all have desires from the past that keep having us reincarnate. How can one consciously avoid having a new desires? Well, we can work on it. There was a disciple, high woman disciple of Master, that said, you're not responsible for the first thought that comes into your mind, but you're responsible for what follows after that. And so a desire might come into your mind, but then maybe you don't have control over whether that comes or not. But you do have some control over whether the mind then becomes attached to that and begins to dwell on it. In the Gita, it says gazing creates the desire, desire creates attachment, attachment creates, gradually you lose your whole consciousness in that flow. So one thing is, especially if you have certain patterns of desires, let's say that you have desires for money, don't read articles, don't look at things, don't dwell on things that remind you of making a lot of money or having a lot of money or having a lot of possessions. So depending on what your patterns of desires, different people have different things that they're working on, different issues that they're working on in any particular life. Avoid those things that stimulate that in your consciousness. Just stay away from them. You don't need to go there. If you have a lot of worries, stay away from the news. The news is designed to make you worry. And then you want to buy, because you're worried and anxious, then you're compelled to buy a newspaper or look on the internet or whatever it is. So if it's making you worry and you're trying to get over that tendency, then avoid the things that stimulate it. And it doesn't necessarily cure it, but it's like eating the proper diet. You're a lot healthier and a lot stronger and a lot better if you eat the proper diet and avoid those foods that are making you sick. You still may have karma from the past that you're working on, but nonetheless, you're doing what you can now. And as Sri Yukteswar said, the past of all men are dark with many shames, but every spiritual effort that we make now improves things in the future. So when a desire comes, just try then to neutralize it by thinking of some higher thing. And then secondly, don't stimulate those things that cause you problems.
You might even think of when you start feeling you're getting pulled into any negative trait that locks you into limited ego consciousness. See it as your enemy. It's not a neutral force. It really isn't. It's a conscious force. It's a conscious force trying to hold us all in delusion. That's the whole game. Someone asked Master, do you think that Satan exists? And he says, oh yes, of course. Satan is a conscious force that tries to hold all men in the wheel of suffering and delusion. And what is Satan's tool? Desire. And that's how he catches us. So it's through desires that we are locked into this pattern of the continuing, oh, if I only had this, if I only got one more car, if I only had, a little more money in the bank, if I only had this or that, or and it keeps us forever reaching outside of ourselves. So once we realize there's a conscious force keeping us like a little tennis ball in the game, we just say, no, I don't want to be in the game anymore, and I'm going to resist. And when Swami was being, as a young monk, was being troubled with some desires, and Master said, I don't expect of you to overcome, but I do expect you to resist. So resistance is a really important concept. When you start feeling pulled into things that you really don't want to be pulled into, say, no, I will resist this. This is my enemy, and I see you as such. And then you can get your energy going behind it. But Master has a wonderful quote where he says, life is a struggle for joy every step of the way. Let me fight the battle of life on the spot where I now stand. And that's why, the great ones speak of the spiritual path as a battlefield, the battle of Kurukshetra. It's an allegory of our own lives. And if we want to be free, we have to take up the sword of our discrimination and fight against the desires that attack us. Okay, next question. I'll read this. What is our responsibility towards our family in our spiritual growth if we want to leave home and stay alone? Should I go? Okay. So this is an important question for young people because, we do have a responsibility to our family. There is a dharma there. But if we can be honest, and self-honesty is one of the most important attitudes if we're talking about right attitude. If we can be honest with ourselves and say, I am not wanting to leave my family, to leave home, because I'm avoiding my responsibilities, because I don't like them, because I don't want to listen to what they have to say and how they're directing my life. I am wanting to make this step because my soul is desperate to really have a deeper spiritual life. Then that's a higher priority, and we have to hold firm in that position. When I first came to Ananda Ashram in California, I was a young person. I was 22, and my parents were not happy. They wanted me to have a traditional life because that's what they understood. And why? Because they wanted me to be happy. Oh, just do like everyone else does, and look how happy they are. And years later, my mother, who was a lovely, lovely soul, beautiful, pure-hearted person, she said to me, you're the only one of all the big family that didn't do what was expected of you. But then she added, but you're the only one that's happy. And so I think in leaving our family, if that really is our divine calling, then we will bring blessings into our family's life, much, much more than if we sacrifice our spiritual life just for their expectations. So you have to be honest, though. It's not something you do lightly, because it will cause suffering, it will cause pain. But ultimately, if it's being done in self-offering to God, then God will take care of the family as well.
As Devi intimated, ultimately, if you choose the spiritual path, that is a far, far greater blessing to your family than doing what they expect, taking some job and earning money or whatever. We know many, many people who have faced this challenge, and it's a difficult challenge in life. But one time, we had been speaking earlier of Rajarsi Janakananda, the most advanced disciple, who was as we said, a self-made multimillionaire. But that wasn't the quality that Master really saw in him. One time, Master and a group of monks were going through the garden at Encinitas, and Rajarsi was meditating there, and he was in a high state. He was in samadhi. Master motioned to the others to be quiet, and they pass through until they were farther away. And Master said, you have no idea what blessings are drawn to this work by having someone who has that deep state of consciousness. So the blessings that are drawn to your family are far greater by you giving a serious effort toward being in tune with God than the blessings that would be there if you were running around doing something that society expected. Mainly, let's face it, what's driving the families is they want to see you do what society expects you to do so that they can feel comfortable in that they have a child that is approved of by society. And so we sometimes are faced with this challenge where we have to step away. And the funny thing is, I was talking with someone an older man, a core member at the Gurgaon Center, and he's seen this pattern many times. And he said, the strange thing is that he was talking about this young Sikh man who was a doctor and had left his family to follow a guru. And the family was just beside themselves with this idiotic choice. And he said, about 5 years later, they were approving of the choice. 10 years after that, they too had joined the guru. And so he said, I've seen this pattern very often, that there's first resistance, then acceptance, finally approval. Okay.
I have to tell you one thing now that she's struggling to turn off her phone. We made in Assisi, when we were lecturing, somehow people never turn off their phones and they're always ringing. And so we said, we're not going to tell you to turn off your phones anymore, but we have this special electronic device that any phone that rings in the room, your number is sent automatically to the telemarketers, and you will be getting many calls. So everyone reach out.
Okay. Yeah, that's the second best thing, is to embarrass the person whose phone has gone off so that they learn quickly. How to accept all things or incidents of your life as acts of the Guru or God's will and lead a happy life. Is all we get or go through in life written in our destiny, or do we have the capacity or way to change? This is a deep and difficult question. When Swamiji was asked this question, he said, a lot more is already written than we accept. And then he said, even the tie that you're going to wear in the morning is already determined. But it's not determined by something outside of yourself. It's determined by your own self. And so there's a lot of patterns that we have developed that determine what's going to happen next in the short term. Anandamoy Ma said that basically we're on a train, which we could call destiny. Our choice is whether to walk to the front of the train or to the back of the train. So much of what happens to us is already determined, but not determined by an agent outside, determined by your own self. That's important to remember. And so where we find ourselves at the present time is, one might say, the accumulation of all that has been done and thought and felt in the past, and the tendencies toward the momentum of the future that are created by that. But in the present, we have some degree of will, of freedom of will. Otherwise, we wouldn't have spirit, we wouldn't have God coming to us as masters saying to do these practices. Why? It'd be like, I don't know, I don't need an example, but if there were no result, they wouldn't tell us to do it. If there were no reason to struggle, then they wouldn't have us struggle. But there's some value in the struggle itself. What the real value is not that we're going to change the course of the train. We're going to change our attitude as passengers on that train. And so whether the train goes here or there is much less important than whether we're happy while we ride that train. And so the reason to be grateful for everything is when you're ungrateful, you're unhappy. And you're mad. And you think you're blaming fate, or you're blaming God, or you're blaming someone else, or and it just makes you unhappy. When you're grateful, you become happy. So it isn't so much about the end of the journey as it is the enjoyment of the journey itself, and the proper attitudes and accepting everything that happens as God's will is one of the proper attitudes that helps us enjoy. Now, when I say enjoy, there, generally speaking, when we talk about accept everything as God's will, people say, oh yeah, if I win the lottery, I accept that as God's will. But if I get ill, I don't accept that as God's will. So generally when we say accept it as God's will, it means those things that don't conform to your likes and your dislikes. And so when something comes that doesn't conform to your likes and dislikes, then accept that that has been drawn by your own self to the ego, by your own ego to the ego, sent by the soul in order to teach you a lesson. And that lesson ultimately will lead you to freedom or the right attitude. And so if illness comes, instead of being angry about illness, or loss of money, if that comes, instead of being angry about that, be grateful. Learn the attitude of gratitude and say, thank you, God. This isn't pleasant, but you're a doctor and you're freeing me from the disease of attachment. Thank you. And so we can always, and when we do that, then it's much easier to go through that unpleasant situation than if you're angry about it. And so all of these teachings help ultimately for us to be happy. Why is it important to be happy? Because it's the echo of bliss, which is the nature of our soul. So if we keep moving that way, then we're okay. We're way past the time that we're supposed to.
1:15.
Oh, 1:15. Oh, we got 7 more minutes.
So I'll add a little thought to this, and then we'll do the last question. What did Jyotish said, quoting Anandamoy Ma, we're on a train, we can either go to the back of the train or the front of the train. So what does that mean, to be in the back or the front? It's the state of consciousness that we have. We're still going to be moving over the same terrain, but it's, he said to be happy, but it's also gratitude, but to experience all of our life circumstances with the highest possible consciousness. It's interesting. We do, as you do here throughout Ananda, a lot of healing prayers for other people. And oftentimes a group will be praying for someone who has a terminal illness and very unlikely that they're going to get well. Sometimes spontaneous miracles happen, but that's in God's hands. But what we have seen in a number of cases, many cases, somebody is dying of a terminal illness, others are praying for them. This state of grace comes. Yes, they still have the pain. Yes, there's still the sadness of saying goodbye to your loved ones, but there's an uplifted consciousness. So it isn't that the person is healed, but they exit this life in an uplifted consciousness. And if you can, Master says, if you exit, your last level of consciousness, when you leave this body, determines what your next incarnation will be. So if we can live riding on this train of our own karma, if we can, through meditation, tumen with the guru, right attitude, everything we've been talking about, if we can keep our consciousness uplifted, that will propel us, whether in this life or the next, with a great impetus towards spiritual development. Okay, so now we'll come to the last question that I think we have one more, but I know we don't have time for this one, that one. So this is the last one we'll try. Is there a way for us to find out the nature or variety of our bad karma? Yes, there's a very simple way to find out the nature of your bad karma. What in your life isn't working right now? Do you not get along with people? Are you having bad health? Are you having a hard time accomplishing your goals? These are all reflections of your bad karma, because it's block. What is bad karma? It's blocked energy, energy that's tied up in little negative patterns. And that's manifest in our life through dysfunction, unhappiness, poor health, all of these things. So it's not a great mystery. And then what do you do about it? Let's say you've had a chronic pattern of not getting along with other people. See that. Again, recognize your enemy. That is such an important part of the spiritual path. If you see, oh, I have the tendency towards, as a child, I was very rude. My mother would often say, oh, what a sharp little tongue you have. And I don't know where that one came from, but it did. So if you see, well, I have a tendency to be rude to other people, to be critical, see that as your enemy and really work on it. Do the exact opposite. Go out of your way to be kind, to be supportive, to say a kind word to a stranger. And then we begin to untie the knots of bad karma. And that's a superficial thing, but you start on the surface. And then through meditation, you get deeper and deeper until when you're sitting in a deep state of meditation, you begin to see where your blind spots are. Oh, I didn't realize that I had such a judgmental attitude. I need to get rid of that. So bad karma is not something like a great mystery that is in the cloud. It's the impediments of our daily life are reflections of our own bad karma. And by looking at them in that way, it gives us a tool with which we can work with them.
There's also the question of what is bad karma and what is good karma. And by and large, those things that come to us and we say, oh, this is bad karma, and those things that come, we say this is good karma, I would say that 80% of the time we're wrong. Because what we're saying is, I like this, and I don't like that. Swami gave a beautiful and very profound definition of good karma and bad karma. Good karma is that brings you closer to God, and bad karma is that which takes you farther away. And so when something comes and your heart doesn't like this, and you say, oh, that's bad karma, probably it's good karma. You've drawn that experience, your heart doesn't like it. Why have you drawn something that your heart doesn't, that your feelings don't like? Because you need to learn a lesson from it. Learning that lesson brings you closer to God. That's good karma. When you get something that you like, if it enhances the ego, that's bad karma. And so maybe you win a prize and it enhances your ego, that's bad karma. But hardly anybody will think winning the lottery is bad karma. They think it's good karma. It can be good karma or bad karma depending on whether you use that money properly and help others and it brings you closer to God. Whether it expands your sense of whether it dilutes the sense of ego or dissolves it, or whether it enhances it. So one is good karma, the other is bad karma, but don't judge what comes into your life simply because it's unpleasant as being bad karma. I would say most of our advancement is done being prodded from behind by those things that are unpleasant. Okay, Devi says. Okay, thank you all. It's been a joy sharing the day with you, and we're back next week. Is that right? Yes. Daya looked at me like, you are?